I invite you to stand for the reading of the Gospel. Today comes from Mark 3, verses 20 to 35. And the crowd came together again so that they could not even eat. When Jesus' family heard it, they went out to restrain Jesus. For people were saying, "He's gone out of his mind." And the scribes who came down from Jerusalem said, "He has Beelzebul, and by the ruler of the demons, he casts out demons." And Jesus called them to him and spoke to them in parables. "How can Satan cast out Satan? If a kingdom is divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. And if a house is divided against itself, that house will not be able to stand. And if Satan has risen up against himself and is divided, he cannot stand, but his end has come. But no one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his property without first tying up the strong man. Then indeed the house can be plundered. Truly, I tell you, people will be forgiven for their sins and whatever blasphemies they utter. But whoever blasphemes against the Holy Spirit can never have forgiveness, but is guilty of an eternal sin. For they had said, he has an unclean spirit." Then Jesus' mother and his brothers came, and standing outside, they sent to him and called him. A crowd was sitting around Jesus, and they said to him, "Your mother and your brothers and sisters are outside asking for you." And Jesus replied, "Who are my mother and my brothers?" And looking at those who sat around him, he said, "Here are my mother and my brothers. Whoever does the will of God is my brother and sister and brother." Friends, this is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. It's hard to escape our DNA. We look like our family. We carry traits from them. And so in the 21st century, we try to make sense of it and use it to our advantage. DNA helps us understand what we're made of, literally. It's hard for me to grasp just how much we have advanced in the scientific fields since researchers were able to map out the human genome, which is sort of like a blueprint of everything, of every being that is on Earth. Something that the scientific community had been working on, had gotten closer and closer, but they were not able to crack the puzzle until they had just the right technological advances. Nowadays, we talk about the mysteries of the DNA like we understand them, like it's a household thing. It has become so popular to use those scientific discoveries about our DNA that now we can look into our makeup as individuals. The DNA tests help us discover our health issues that we might have, or they might point out to some potential health problems we will have in the future or in our family's future. We are also now able to discover connections to our ancestors because DNAs can test and sort of like trace, think of an overgrown forest. And so we're looking through that forest for those overgrown trails until we get to the beginning of the trail. So the DNA test sort of helps us see where we have come from all around the world, where our ancestors have come from. And all it takes is, I don't know, about $100 and a little swab of saliva from inside your mouth, and you mail it, and back come these results, this knowledge, this opportunity to peer into our past. And even before all of this was in vogue or even possible, people were always interested in their ancestry, and they would have family trees that they would fill out, and they would join genealogical groups in order to do the kind of detective work to find ancestors through research. In the time of Jesus, family connections were also very important. And though the Jewish people would not have talked about familial connections in the same way that we do, even their own families or their ancestors, they would use different words, but they were still very focused on what family was all about. They used basically three concepts or three groupings to talk about what we would say is family. The first largest group is the tribe. And so this is a very large, broad group of people to whom they were related. This is a large group. Think of it like a large group of distant relatives, but that you feel close to. Think of people you feel a strong connection to and pride about being a part of that group. Say, for example, the pride of being a Hoosier or the pride of being from Texas. Only like blow that up and expand it to a kind of an emotional level that is hard to imagine. I know, even Texans, even beyond that, however proud they are of them. And of course it has a religious context because we talk about the 12 tribes of Israel. These are the lineage from Jacob, whose name changed to Israel, as a patriarch of the entire people of God. And from among his 12 children then came these tribes, these groupings from those individuals. So everyone who was an Israelite would have had a tribe. Then there's a grouping called a clan. Now these are smaller groups. There's subsets of tribes, and they're geographically co-located, so close by. One feature is that in ancient times, their societal structure had an expectation that one would marry only within that particular clan, because there was connections to land or land they claimed ownership to. So being a part of a clan means you stayed within that clan for those kind of relationships. Think of a clan like being in a really small town where everybody knew everybody's business and everybody was related to everybody else. And that also had a religious context, for there were notions of not straying far from that clan, like in marriage, for example, or outside that expected set of groups. There was a sense of a priority for ethnic and religious purity, or at least ethnic and religious containment of that group. And then the smallest unit is what's translated as the father's house. Think of this like an extended family with an older living patriarch and all his descendants and their relatives. Again, not only were there family ties, but there were also connections to property, and also connections maybe to trade, like this is something that they did, like being carpenters, and that was passed on from generation to generation. This really is the center of life in the ancient world with the Israelites. The gravitational pull of the family system is what held their culture together. And so it was not easy to pull away from it. For all the men, whatever their marital status, they would always belong to their father's house. There were benefits of this, of course, because this is the structure in which they lived. Now, it was entirely different, though, for women. Because through arrangements among adults or patriarchs, there would be agreements about a marriage. There would be a dowry paid by the groom's family to the bride's family. And then the bride would leave her father's house and now become a part of the clan from her husband's clan, from her husband's father's house. So now she would belong to that lineage of the father's house, her father-in-law. All of these familial structures were very much top-down, lots of power to the father or the head of household, who in fact doled out not just regular family discipline, but even acted as judge and jury in some pretty serious matters. So that's the background for today's gospel passage when we talk about family. And Jesus acknowledges the established familial system, but then, as always, Jesus always does, gives it a twist. The whole conversation had happened because Jesus had been healing a lot of people. He was healing so many people that wherever he was mobbed. And he was in this house, and the house was packed. No one could get in. Everybody kept coming in. In fact, the scripture tells us he was so busy doing healing, see, they couldn't even eat. They were so busy. And the conversation starts because Jesus' enemies are trying to discredit him. It's a real smear campaign. And so what they say is, he's lost his mind. He has a demon. The only reason he's healing people is because he has a deal with the devil. They were trying to discredit all the good things that he was doing. And so word somehow had reached Jesus' mother and his siblings. And they rushed to him. Now it's not clear, at least not from the passage, whether they were going there to save him from himself, to support him, to care for him, or whether they were going there to take control of matters, to bring the situation back into control, to rein Jesus in. The house, like I said, it was so crowded. People were there to get healed and to listen to Jesus preaching. And so the family, when they come, they can't get in. The best thing they can do is sort of say, hey, tell him, hey, tell him. And so the word went out, went in from the outside, reverberating all the way in until finally somebody whispers in Jesus' ears, your family is here. There was weight to that. Your family is here. Think of yourself when you were a little kid and you were playing past when the street lights came on. And some word came, your mom is calling you. Mary was pulling rank. Maybe she was worried. Maybe she was worried that Jesus was taken advantage of. Maybe she could already see that the authorities had it in for Jesus and that this would end badly. It seems her efforts were trying to offer her protection to her son within the context of the structure for family that she knew, that she lived in. And then Jesus, as he often does with his teachings, challenges the entire structure. And he presents the possibility of a surrogate family system. He wasn't the first one to talk about that. He was not the first one to create an alternative for family. But the thing is, in that culture, the alternative to family happened in unhelpful situations. So there was a sense of disempowerment that created a surrogate family. As I was saying, the bride is shifted as property to the new father's house. There's also a surrogate family that comes about when people are shunned. Think about people who had leprosy. Well, nobody wanted them around. And so they gathered among themselves and they became family for each other because they had no more family to cling to. But what Jesus is saying is that he's saying proactively that there's an opportunity to think about family differently. In fact, family is ultimately about the DNA of our faith, he says, and of our service to God. He's saying to the people who were there, if the love of God runs through your veins, if service to people is part of your heritage, if you want to do God's will more than you want to do your own, then we are family together. He's not shunning Mary or his siblings, but he's saying that a new level of family, disconnected from that power structure that kept the tribe and the clan and the father's house in charge, that was something worth thinking about, and that is what God was after. This new sense of family based on wanting to do God's will. In our life as a congregation, I talk a lot about being a family of faith. Here we are, we learn from each other. We are guided by God and we grow with new perspectives. We are having an impact on the character, on the DNA of this family of faith. Most of you know that I served as pastor right out of seminary in the First Presbyterian Church of St. Anne, a small congregation. The town of St. Anne, Illinois, is a town of 1,200 people. I was new at ministry, so everything was new. I was noticing every detail I could manage. And I realized that that church, First Presbyterian, was different from the other churches that were in the community. There was a Baptist church, a large Catholic church, and outside of town, a Reformed church. And these were all the same people, pretty much descended from the same group of people throughout the last 150 years. But the Presbyterians were different. It was a warmer warmer congregation, a caring congregation. It felt very inviting. And I kept wondering, why is it different from the other congregations? The people are pretty much the same. And it occurred to me, the longer I stayed there, that there were 4 or 5 pillar families of that congregation, the First Presbyterian, that had been in that congregation for generations, a couple from really way the beginning of the formation of the church in 1860. And it occurred to me that the way they were family created the character of the church, gave it its DNA, because that church was who those people were. And because of who they were, they didn't set out to make a closed circuit, but rather it was open. And they allowed even an inexperienced immigrant pastor to enter that system and to impact it. And I was impacted by it as well. So as a church, we are to strive to be the family of faith by being attentive to the work of the Spirit around us, showing us where we are to go, so that we might do the Spirit's will, always challenging us, always giving us new perspectives. The family of faith seeks to live out God's call for us to love all people, not from a distance, but through forming the kinds of family relationships we can wrap our heads around. The family of faith grows and stretches through the folk who become a part of the body. The DNA of this family of faith includes our commitment to listen with new ears in every generation for the places where the Spirit is calling us to do God's will. Doing the will of God from the vantage point of this particular family of faith includes and has included joining the active work of the Spirit all around us, standing up in solidarity with African Americans frozen out of the housing market in the 1970s, standing together with the LGBTQ community seeking full equality, standing with vulnerable, undocumented immigrants who already make our community better, standing with people who are caught in the grasp of addictions, and standing with people who are dismissed, even shunned by our community because of poverty. And it's not just about solidarity, but it's about saying, we are family. It's about saying, we are family together. And it is recognizing that those individuals who we recognize as family make our community and our congregation stronger, richer, better. We don't do it perfectly. We have plenty of room to improve. But we work on it because that's what we're called to be. Because that's in our DNA. We do it because that's the way we read the message of the gospel. That family redefining gospel, that upside down realm of God gospel. Our faith DNA takes us right to Jesus. His is the identity from which we draw our own. He calls us brothers, sisters, siblings. And He gathers us to live out God's love in all that we do. And for that, we give God thanks. Amen.